Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 273 is reported to be official, and I have two major problems with this UFC pay-per-view. So just to do a quick recap, because a lot of UFC events have changed over the past week or so, I'm going to recap you on everything that's happened so far. So Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway 3, as well as Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan 2, was announced for the March 5th card UFC 272. Well, a couple days later, it was announced that Max Holloway had to withdraw from the card due to injury. And then Aljamain Sterling came out and said today on his podcast that Petr Yan could not make the March 5th date, so their fight was being rescheduled till April. So there was talk about a potential replacement opponent for Max Holloway to fight Alexander Volkanovski. And now it is being reported as official that we are getting Alexander Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie for the featherweight title, as well as Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan, unifying the bantamweight titles at UFC 273 now, which is April 9th. It was originally reported it was going to be in New York, but supposedly now it may be in Las Vegas. They don't know 100% what the location is going to be yet. So first off, my reaction to both fights. Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling as a co-main event. I love that fight. I really want some clarity to the bantamweight division after the whole debacle of 2021 with Petr Yan winning the fight, throwing an illegal knee, getting DQ'd, and Aljamain Sterling being the undisputed champion. And then it was rescheduled for UFC 267 that we were finally going to get some clarity to the division. Everyone looks at Aljamain Sterling as a paper champion just because of how he won the title. And Aljamain Sterling had neck surgery, so he had to push the fight back. So Petr Yan fought Corey Sandhagen at UFC 267, and the UFC put an interim title on the line. So now it's Petr Yan's the interim champ. Aljamain Sterling's the undisputed bantamweight champ, and now they're unifying the belts finally at UFC 273. We got to wait all the way until April, which is 13 months past when the original fight happened. But I'm really intrigued into this fight, and even more so than the original fight, because Petr Yan, I think, probably is the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world right now. He's one of my favorite fighters to watch. He has really no weaknesses. His striking, his variety of attack, his clinch work, his fight IQ, his adjustments mid-fight. I'm super excited to see him fight Aljamain Sterling. And after the very, one-sided beatdown of Aljamain Sterling at UFC 259 last year before the illegal knee, it looked like Petr Yan was going to get the stoppage in the third or fourth round. It was getting to that point. The first and second round were mildly competitive, but Petr Yan, as he always does, makes adjustments and starts really just taking over a fight. I'm really curious, after that fight, what kind of adjustments has Aljamain Sterling been working on for the last year? And imagine if Aljamain Sterling can somehow pull off the upset. That would be absolutely insane. Everybody is counting Aljamain Sterling out against Petr Yan in this rematch, and everyone thinks it's just a foregone conclusion that Petr Yan's going to win this fight. And I'm super excited for this fight. As far as the main event, just the fight itself, Alexander Volkanovski versus Korean Zombie is a fight that I've wanted to see for a while. It's kind of weird circumstances now, but I like this fight. Alexander Volkanovski, one of the most well-rounded fighters on the entire roster, has great striking, great stamina, great jiu-jitsu, great wrestling, great grappling, high fight IQ. The guy has unlimited stamina. And the Korean Zombie has great skills as well. He has great striking. His takedown defense could use a little bit of work. His clinch work is amazing. His submissions and jiu-jitsu is amazing. So he's a very good fighter. And also, Korean Zombie is never in a boring fight. He is never, ever in a boring fight. So I don't mind him getting the shot here. I'm a huge fan of Korean Zombie. He's on at least a one-fight win streak. But that is my first major problem, is if you are going to throw Korean Zombie into a title shot against Alexander Volkanovski, with him being on a one-fight win streak, which that one win over Dan Ige, that's all he has, I would have not complained if it was to save UFC 272 in March. That card is creeping up on us. It's 2 months away. We need a replacement right now. I would not have cried about that. But my first major problem is the fact that they are now pushing the fight back a month. So we are 12 weeks away from this featherweight title fight, and they're still giving it to Korean Zombie. I don't understand how that makes sense. So first off, if you're going to push it back a month, you already have a headliner for UFC 272 in Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal. So how injured is Max Holloway? Why not just reschedule that trilogy bout for the following month. Now, let's say Max Holloway is a little bit more seriously injured. If we're going to wait another month, might as well wait another 2 months. Why not let Max Holloway defend in April, May, June, even? I just don't see the point in rescheduling it and still giving a guy an undeserved title shot, even though I really like the guy. Regardless if I'm a huge fan of Korean Zombie, this is still a relatively undeserved title shot. Then, on top of that, you just have Max Holloway's kind of, him just looming over the division, because there's a lot of people that think he won that second fight. That second fight was razor close. The first fight was close, but I thought Alexander Volkanovski clearly won. But the second fight between these guys was just razor thin. The decision was super close. And a lot of people just think Max is the uncrowned champion. So I just feel like, if you're going to reschedule Alexander Volkanovski anyway, why not just wait for Max Holloway? So my second major problem with it is, if you're going to reschedule it anyway again, why not at least wait to see what happens in the main event for UFC Vegas 46, which is Giga Chikadze versus Calvin Kattar? If Giga Chikadze is able to beat Calvin Kattar, who's ranked in the top 5, and he's able to beat him impressively and come out relatively unscathed, he will be on a 10-fight win streak, with his last 2 wins coming over Edson Barboza and now Calvin Kattar. So Giga Chikadze, far more deserved this featherweight title shot than Korean Zombie, especially with that 2-fight win streak alone. But he will have been on a 10-fight win streak if he's able to defeat Calvin Kattar. So why not wait the extra 4 days to see what happens in Giga Chikadze versus Calvin Kattar before deciding to give Korean Zombie the title shot? And, as much as I love Korean Zombie, for me, I think this stylistically is a fun fight. But after seeing Korean Zombie's, match up against Brian Ortega, that was only October of 2020, and Brian Ortega just outstriked the Korean Zombie for the entire fight. I know MMA math doesn't work, but Brian Ortega just got a one-sided beatdown by Alexander Volkanovski back in September. So, if you really start doing the math there, and I know it doesn't always work, but the fact that Korean Zombie got outstruck by Brian Ortega by a very large margin, hurt multiple times, and then Brian Ortega went on to then get heavily outstruck by Alexander Volkanovski and really brutalized. And I know a lot of people said this was the fight of the year, but other than those 2 submission attempts in the 3rd round, Brian Ortega had nothing to offer for Alexander Volkanovski other than those 2 submission attempts, and then maybe, it was kind of a close 5th round. So, Brian Ortega has a win over Korean Zombie fairly recently. Alexander Volkanovski has a dominant win over Brian Ortega. It just really doesn't match up for me as far as my interest level in who's going to win. Stylistic wise, I think this should be a fun fight. But on paper and just looking at these 2 guys, there's very little doubt in my mind that Alexander Volkanovski can lose to Korean Zombie. Now, it all depends what Korean Zombie shows up. I know sometimes he shows up looking like a world beater, but other times, he kind of looks a little bit off like he did in the Brian Ortega fight. Also, I think the narrative about the Brian Ortega fight will be that Korean Zombie was hurt badly early and he just never recovered. That's a narrative they tend to use sometimes when trying to sell us a pay-per-view that, isn't necessarily justified. And then on top of that, I hate to even bring this up into the equation. It was just recently announced that the UFC is raising the pay-per-view price to $75. So now you got to pay $75 plus tax, plus your ESPN Plus subscription. And we're getting Volkanovski versus Korean Zombie. For me, I'm more excited for Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. I would have preferred the UFC wait for Max Holloway to fight Alexander Volkanovski in the trilogy, or give Giga Chikadze with a win over Calvin Kattar the next shot. Now, if Giga loses and Max is out for like a year, there's absolutely no gripes from me. There's really no other options. There's nobody else who would deserve this shot right now. But, I don't think that Max has a very serious injury. We don't know. But I think if he was out for 6 to 12 months, he tore an ACL, I think it would have been specifically, in the news that Max Holloway tore an ACL, is going to be out for a year, or he's having knee surgery. And the fact that that wasn't said leads me to believe that it's not a very, very serious injury. So I just wish they would have rescheduled the trilogy or waited to see if Giga Chikadze could have won his fight against Calvin Kattar. Then he'd been on a 10-fight win streak. And for me, I'm super interested in the Alexander Volkanovski versus Giga Chikadze fight. And just one last thing. So now, if Volkanovski goes and beats Korean Zombie in April at UFC 273, and then Max is ready to go right afterwards. What if Volkanovski wants some time off? And then, now we have to wait till November, December to see Volkanovski versus Holloway 3. And then in the meantime, you got Giga Chikadze, who's arguably earned a shot, kind of sitting on the sidelines. And then even to top it all off, this just hit me, last year, originally Volkanovski was supposed to fight Brian Ortega in March. He was supposed to fight Brian Ortega on the same card that Francis Ngannou versus Stipe Miocic 2 happened on. Alexander Volkanovski got sick, and, supposedly he was able to fight within a month or two, but they decided to make Volkanovski and Ortega the Ultimate Fighter coaches, and then that fight got pushed all the way till the end of September. So Volkanovski only fought one time in 2021, and now we're pushing his fight back even further. We're not getting the Max Holloway trilogy. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still think this is a solid card with at least the 2 title fights, and I absolutely love the Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling fight. But I just wish they would have gone about this differently. But maybe some more information will come out. Maybe Giga Chikadze loses to Calvin Kattar. Maybe Max Holloway's out for the rest of the year. And then it will all make sense. I don't have all those details. Guys, let me know what you think in the comments section. Do me a favor, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like the video. And thank you so much for watching.